Can AI chatbots help you with your poker game? No, not really. In fact, it might make you even worse. I'm Mike Brady, and my friend Stu has been on a bad stretch playing tournaments lately. So bad, in fact, that he turned to Chat GPT to analyze his hands. He ran the hands and analysis by me, and I instantly knew that this had to be shared with you here on the Upswing Poker channel. But I'm not alone. To add some proper credibility to our analysis today, I've brought out a big gun. Two-time Triton main event champion, two-time Super High Roller Bowl champion, the lead coach of the new Modern Tournament Mastery course, coming out soon on upswingpoker.com. This guy is truly a top pro. Thanks for joining us, Tim Adams.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. Let's see what we have in store.
Yeah, the robots cooked up some good stuff for us. So here's how this will go. I'll walk you through a hand that my friend Stu played, then read ChatGPT's analysis. From there, Tim will critique the bot's analysis and break down the hand properly. As usual, I'll ask follow-ups on behalf of you, the viewer. Ready to do this, Tim?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Our first hand, blinds are 300, 600. This is a live tournament in Los Angeles. And our hero raises under the gun with ace-7 of clubs to 1,300 chips. The cutoff and the big blind, who is noted as a fish, calls. ChatGPT just had one word to say about the pre-flop play here. Fine. What do you think, Tim?
I mean, one thing that I would just nitpick about is when you're telling a hand history, like already, I'm not sure of our hero's stack size, which would be important to know. We have the cutoff calling. I also don't know the stack size and the big blind overcalling. So maybe this is being nitpicky, but if you're sharing a hand history, for the reader of the hand history to conceptually understand what the stack to pot ratio is, tell the stack sizes. If it's in equal stacks, maybe tell what the cutoff is flatting off of. It's going to look a lot different if it's 30 blinds or 15 blinds. Ranges are going to change a lot. And when you say under the gun, you have to describe what that means. Is that under the gun 8-handed or 6-handed? That's going to be the difference between like a 24% opening range to like an 18% opening range. So it's going to matter a lot. And then finally, for ease for the reader, I would always show the size of the pot per street, again, just to make it really easy. I basically bitch to my friends about this type of thing who send me a hand history, they ask for opinion, and then I'm like spending a couple of minutes trying to figure out what's the size of the pot, how big did the fish in the spot lead. So just to already get going and talk about that, where I'm being a bit of a baby, but yeah, just like, streamline this for me.
Yeah, I think that's super common. I get this a lot when people ask me questions about hands, or friends will run hands by me. They'll kind of give me just like a little piece of the puzzle. And I feel like I need to, like you said, extract all of the rest of the info. And I think it also indicates a potential lack of thinking about the things that are important. Like, are you caring about how deep the cutoff is here? Are you caring about how deep the big blind is here? Because all that stuff will matter. And I think ace-7 of clubs, regardless of all this stuff, is a fine open. It's a fine open size. There's not too much to talk about there.
Right.
But the lack of detail is what's potentially something to work on for our hero here in this hand. We can move on to the flop from here, though. It comes ace, jack, 9 with 2 spades. And the fish leads out for 2,200. There's something like 5,000, 5,500 in the pot. So it's like, let's call it a 40% pot lead. Both Stu and the cutoff call what ChatGPT had to say about this one. The fish donks into 2 players on ace, jack, 9. Calling is best. Raising accomplishes little. Once again, our hero has ace-7. The board is ace, jack, 9 with 2 spades. What do you think about the flop play in general here, Tim?
Well, for the big blind leading, well, definitely not a favorable board for the big blind. Like overall, so this is like 30 BB effective. There just wouldn't be that much leading in theory, even on like low and connected boards. Like globally, you're probably leading less than 1%. So just very little leading. You have the weakest range from the big blind. Even if you do connect well with those, say, low and connected boards, like this board for sure, there's no leading. Essentially, you just have the weakest range. You have a bunch of misses. Overall, there just should not be much leading from the big blind. As played, since this is what the VIP or the casual player or the fish, whatever you want to call it, did do. I think as the IP player, as our hero here, just calling and going from there. You do have another live hand behind you, so I think just calling makes the most sense.
What's your threshold for raising here? Like obviously ace 7, pretty dumpy kicker, but I assume once we get into the ace queen, ace king territory, we want to start mixing in at least a good bit of raising. How are you thinking about that?
These spots are so sensitive to the player you're up against. Like if this is the type of fish who leads and overvalues the strength of a hand like a weak ace, then yes, always raising a strong ace. If it's someone who I'm kind of readless against, I like, even with good ace X, kind of taking it slow and seeing where it goes. But again, it's so player dependent that it's hard to just like pinpoint an exact strategy that I would have.
Sure, makes sense. Well, we'll get a little bit more info about this player as the hand goes on, but of course he didn't have it in the moment. The turn is another ace, doesn't bring any extra flush draws, so our hero now has trip aces on ace, jack, 9, ace. The fish leads again for 4,000. That's 4,000 into roughly, let's call it 12,000.
Yeah.
Stu now has pretty interesting spot. I think he's got about 20K behind or something like that. He raises to 15,000. The cutoff gets out of the way, and the fish calls all in with 10-8 offsuit for a flopped open-ender. That is in not super great shape, especially against Stu's hand. His 7 isn't even live. Now let's go over to ChatGPT's analysis. Once the ace pairs and he bets again, your jam is pretty clearly exploitative rather than solver-driven. And against this profile, I think that's good. This is getting into some juicy bot analysis here. Why, the bot asks? Because population donk bet call ranges here are weak ace X, draws, pair plus draw, and random spaz. Interesting that ChatGPT is using the non-politically correct spaz there. Yeah. Your stack to pot ratio is awkward enough that jamming denies equity and gets looked up by worse ace X, which it's worth noting that a kicker wouldn't play here, surprisingly often. And the result is a reminder of why live poker is beautiful and horrifying simultaneously. You got called by 10-8, drawing dead except to the queen. One queen, actually, it says. That's not a bad beat story. That's an advertisement for why these tournaments are profitable. Absolute chef's kiss of a ChatGPT sentence at the end there. The classic, it's not X, it's Y sentence structure. First of all, let's talk about the hand in general, and then we could talk about kind of what the bot was saying. So we face this 4K bet on the turn. It's like a third pot. How are you looking at this spot as Stu when you turn trips?
Again, we're out in the woods here with this type of node, since it's, again, so player dependent, since in theory the node doesn't exist. But, there are upsides for both plays. Like if you do call, right, and say the cutoff folds, there's going to be half pot in the river. You have to ask yourself, is your opponent the type of player to follow through with bluffs? Maybe there's an upside to calling. Another upside is if you just call and say the player behind you jams, you're getting a lot more information. Maybe the big blind then jams and you can get away. Even if the cutoff jams and it's back to you, like the big blind folds, like you're probably not going to be in great shape. Potentially, these things are all, again, you're out in the woods. If you do jam, you're not really denying equity from the big blind because we already know the outcome of the hand. He did bet call like a terrible draw, but you are denying equity from the cutoff. So say they have a good flush draw or something. So there's a bonus there. So again, it's really, really player dependent. I really think you can go either way. In this particular spot, I'm kind of giving credit to our hero here because it seems like he pinpointed his villain and basically got the villain to play the hand terribly.
Yeah, it definitely results-wise worked out really well for Stu, and he clearly had a beat on his opponent. Moving on to what the bot, ChatGPT, was saying about this hand, this is kind of going to be a theme throughout this video where it just says terms and words all over the place. I actually find it really fascinating how often it does this, where it just uses words, like random phrases that it read on upswingpoker.com or some other site. Like it just generates random text in a way. So at one point it says the jam is pretty clearly exploitative rather than solver driven. Based on your analysis, you agree with that sentiment to a degree, right?
Well, again, for it to be a solver-esque hand, it has to be probably in a node that exists. This is definitely far, far and away from a node that would ever exist in the solver world because, well, the big blind would never ever get leads on the flops to begin with. So this is just an obscure hand where, Yeah, at this point, jamming the turn, is it solver driven or explo driven? Well, it's an explo hand, so I guess yes, it's an explo jam, but it makes a lot of sense, anyways. I would say to rip in this particular spot, even versus someone pretty reasonable, because the pot is getting so big and kind of protecting your hand, winning what's already in the middle. There are real benefits to that.
Certainly, certainly. It goes on to say that the donk bet slash call ranges here, so the hands that the player is going to lead out with and then call a jam, are weak ace X, pair plus draw, which I guess that would be like 9x of spades specifically, and a random spaz. I don't know why a random spaz would bet and then call off unless you're calling this hand a random spaz. I don't know. Stacked pot ratio is awkward. That's actually kind of true. I don't totally disagree with that. The part about jamming denies equity and gets looked up by worse ace X, this is something that I've noticed the bots really don't understand about poker. And for those who don't know how LLMs like Chat GPT work, it's not understanding poker in a holistic sense. It's generating text. It's trying to predict what you want to hear, essentially. And that's why it's able to say something like, you can get looked up by worse ace X, when of course, if you understand poker even in a basic way, you know that 3 aces with a jack 9 kicker, those are your kickers. Like, the kickers don't play. If the guy has ace 5, the 5 and R7 are not playing. So the bot's just not even able to understand that. It's just generating text. I do actually agree with the end where, this is a reminder of why live poker is beautiful and horrifying simultaneously. It's very true, but I'm going to give the bot's analysis, maybe a D plus on this one. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete word salad. A lot of it is just like, it's like speaking another language, really, right? I'm trying to decipher there's a few things that make sense, and then there's a bunch of other things that make absolutely no sense. So it's really hard to wrap your head around it.
Get ready for more of that, Tim. By the way, before we move on to the next hand, Tim's new course, Modern Tournament Mastery, comes out this upcoming Monday. Tim has been working his ass off on this thing for the last, 8-9 months or so. And he even tapped a couple of his close friends to help make it even more valuable. Tim, could you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about what you've been working on?
Yeah, I'm really excited to share the new course we built. I was lucky enough to get Daniel Dvoress to jump along and join me in the project. In my opinion, he's the best coach out there. Stephen Chidwick also joins as a guest coach. So yeah, I was thrilled by that. He's obviously a legend. I think he's regarded as the best of the best. Essentially, the course just takes you through how I study, how I prepare, early stages, the mid stages, which can always be tricky, end game, and yeah, to wrap it up, we do a little bonus course on super high roller mechanics. So we hope the course is fully complete and it gives you a lot to work with. At the end of the day, poker is about just gaining more knowledge, and I hope that's kind of what we provided to you guys.
I've looked through the course a lot, reviewed a lot of the content. The outline looks absolutely stupendous. It really covers all of the things that a top level pro like Tim finds important. He goes really in depth on those different parts of the game. And I think whether you play, 500 plus average buy-in online or $300 live tournaments, there is going to be something in this course that will really help you make more money over the rest of your poker journey. I would definitely say that, would you agree, Tim, that the people who are going to get the most value out of this, probably people who play like average buy-in 200 or more online, or maybe like 1Ks live. It's not to say that like lower stakes players won't get value, but that's really who you're mainly talking to throughout the course.
When you're making content for a really broad group of people, it's always this thing where some people are going to just get a little more out of it than others. And I think you nailed it. I think it's mostly people playing, $200 AB online. And like you said, maybe 1K live, where their goal is to move up and play higher, or feel just more comfortable playing 5Ks or 10Ks. Like, there is a lot of information in there, and it is pretty dense with theory, but we wanted to also make it interactive. So there's a big stream review that Stevie and I do, which it's a stream where we both final table the tournament. I do a lot of drilling versus the bot, because that's how I actually study in a lot of scenarios, where I try to get an idea of the theory, and then I actually try to put myself in scenarios where I'm in difficult situations versus, an unexploitable perfect player. And I just try to relay not only my knowledge, but how I feel about certain spots. We're always looking through solves with an exploitative lens. So we're not just, fully robotic the way we look at poker. There's lots of things available to you when you make a poker decision. And that's what we're trying to get at, that there's just so many factors. And I hope the course, in a general sense, encompasses all those things that may make you a better player. And that's our hope.
Yeah, we truly guarantee that this will help your game. So make sure you check it out this Monday, coming to Upswing Poker. And if you get it during launch week, you're also going to get Tim's bonus course, super high roller mechanics, some super juicy, valuable stuff in there, totally for free. That's going to cost $300, basically starting next Saturday. But you get it for free if you get the course during launch week. That launch date is May 25th. That's a Monday. If you want to pre-register and get notified when the course goes live, check out the link in the description. Moving on to hand number 2. Blinds are 500, 1,000. There is something that carries over from the previous advice that you gave, Tim, where we don't know what stage of the tournament this is. And when the blinds are 500, 1,000, we are potentially approaching the money or some sort of important consideration like that. But we do get the stack size this time. The small blind, who is noted as a fish, limps in off of a 30K stack, and Stu checks in the big blind with 8-7 suited. The Chat GPT bot did not comment on the preflop play. It only said, "This is probably my favorite hand." I guess we'll see why shortly. But I don't think the preflop decision is necessarily trivial. What do you think about this spot in the big blind? Do we ever go for an ISO raise with 8-7 suited? Pure check this hand. What do you think?
So with 8-7 suited in particular, I would never raise this. You want to be very polar at this depth because getting limp jammed on is a real possibility. So I would mostly structure my raises like for, say, bluffs, because I don't want to be very linear. It would be, very one high, one low, like 10-2 off. If there were suited hands, it'd be more like 6-2 suited, 5-2 suited type of hands. But 8-7 suited is really pretty. I want to see a flop. It retains equity really well and like a limp check. So definitely not interested in raising this one. I want to be very polar, and this is more of like a middling hand that I don't want to get blown off of.
Yeah, it's such a disaster if we like raise to 3 big blinds here, they jam, and we have to fold a hand that probably has, 35, 40% equity against the jamming range, depending on what they're doing it with. Just pretty much a disaster. So we'd much rather take a flop. But then I gather deeper stacked, you would consider raising this hand. Like if we started the hand 100 blinds deep, where you can actually raise and then potentially call a 3-bet, now it gets into the territory of being able to maybe raise with 8-7 suited and similar suited connectors, right?
Right, exactly. So when we're deeper, of course, we're not getting blown off of our equity. That's, a big part of this, right? Is if you at 100, if you face a limp and you definitely want to raise this, probably pure, you can comfortably call a limp re-raise. So that's not a problem. It's just when your decision turns binary, where you actually are getting limp jammed on the shallower depths. So yes, you don't want to be raising this particular hand.
Moving on to the flop then, as Stu does check, we get the King 6-5 rainbow with the King of diamonds. So we have a nice open-ended straight draw with a backdoor flush draw. The fish bets 2,500, so that's roughly a pot size bet or near it. And Stu goes for a raise to 7,500. That's a 3x raise, and the fish snap calls. By the way, for anyone listening on podcast platforms, if you're having trouble following along on the hands, we're going to put the hand histories and maybe the ChatGPT analysis as well in the description of the podcast, so you can check that out if you're struggling to follow along at all. Just please don't do it while you're driving. Fish bets 2,500 into roughly a 3K chip pot on that King 7-6 rainbow board. And Stu, with some backdoor draws, he decides to raise it up to 7,500, 3 times the bet, and the fish, quote unquote, snap calls. Moving on to the bot's analysis, your flop raise is excellent. Strong words. Strong equity, fold equity, range advantage from aggression, live players massively overfold turns after calling flop raises with weak 1 pair hands. Ooh, talk about word salad. Let's talk first about what you actually think of this raise here, Tim. Are you okay with, kind of turning this hand to like a mergey, kind of not bluff, little bit of a value bet, or do you prefer just calling?
Yeah, my default would to just be to call this hand, especially versus like a casual player who's going to be unpredictable. Like I assume our hero here is raise and then calling versus the jam. You definitely can't raise fold after you've put in so much money with so much equity. So yeah, my default like game plan would be to call this and didn't just often raise like strong King X and kind of expect my opponent to potentially overplay something. If again, there's a lot of nuance in that, but yeah, he is, the small blind is betting close to full pot here. That's usually a player like who isn't going anywhere. So I don't like raising if you're thinking about doing something crazy like raise folding, but I don't assume that he's doing that.
Yeah, interesting. I think against, this is just speculation on my part, I think against live players, raise calling off is going to do really, really poorly here because they're just going to have a king way too often, way too often. So that would actually make me lean even more towards what you're saying and like really want to call, because if we raise and get jammed on, yeah, we're arguably forced to call off, and I think we're going to be in relatively poor shape there.
Yeah, then I hate it because if you're thinking about raising and folding, then that's quite problematic. Yeah, I would always just call this then. And yeah, for bluff raising, I mean, it's limb check. You have so many hands like to choose from. You can use 4-2 offsuit. You can use even 9-7 offsuit. But yeah, this one has way too much equity to ever think about like putting this amount of money in and then folding.
Yeah, and then looking at ChatGPT's analysis, it really just is a word salad. I love the phrase range advantage from aggression. Really, really wonderful combination of words there. Yeah, I mean, live players massively overfold turns after calling flop raises with weak one pair hands. I mean, I think everyone kind of folds turn a lot when you call the flop with a weak one pair hand. That's kind of how poker works. You don't usually...
And sorry to cut you off, but exactly if the villain snap called, usually that's leaning defensive, a little more weak. So yeah, those type of things make sense where maybe the range is just a tad bit weaker. But at the end of the day, like even though it's a limp pot, a lot of money has now gone in. So like I said, the small blind bet close to full pot on the flop got raised a relatively big size and called. Even with casual players or fish or whatever you want to call them, usually they have okay hands, I would imagine. But yes, the snap call leans me to think it's a little more defensive.
Moving on to the turn, we get the 10 of diamonds, pretty beautiful card. So we pick up a flush draw to go along with our open-ended straight draw. The fish checks, and Stu goes for a 20K bet. It's basically putting the opponent all in. ChatGPT goes on to say, then once the diamond arrives, your 20K sizing is brutal and correct. A lot of players check because, quote unquote, we got there. But against fish, big turn pressure prints because they hate bluff catching, they fear flushes disproportionately, and they call flop too wide. Very nice pressure application. So before I toss it over to you for real analysis, as Tim is actually cringing at what he just heard me say, this is another interesting instance of the LLM not understanding what is happening holistically. So it's simultaneously saying that we're applying pressure, we're going to get him to fold a lot, but he's also saying they fear flushes disproportionately and quote unquote, we got there. So the LLM is not able to distinguish between what we've turned in reality, which is a flush draw, and a flush. Again, they don't know the hand rankings even. It is just generating text. So you got to be careful trusting these LLMs with important information. Doug did a really funny series about this on his channel. A bunch of LLMs played each other in this big heads-up bracket tournament thing. It was put on by Kegel. It's like a division of Google. If you haven't checked out those videos, definitely check them out. They're quite fun. But Doug is able to query the LLMs and ask, like, hey, why did you make this play? And there was one hand in particular. I might get the cards a little bit wrong. Sorry for this tangent, everyone, but I promise it's arguably worth it. The board is like Jack 9-3 with 2 clubs, 1 diamond. The LLMs get it in. It's like ChatGPT's bot versus like the DeepSeek bot or something. And they get it in with ace 10 with the ace of clubs versus ace king of diamonds. So it's 2 backdoor flush draws. One of them says, I raised and got it in because I had the nut flush draw. Not true. Backdoor nut flush draw. The other one said I raised and got it in because I had the nut flush. He did not. It had either 3 or 4 of to the suit. So that's another example of it literally does not understand even what you have. So Tim, now that we got the bot's analysis out of the way, what do you think of this play?
Yeah, I think you can go either way. You can obviously check and realize your equity, or I mean, there's a big upside to jamming, especially if you think the player you're up against is someone who's going to fast play the flop with their king X. If you did get defensive vibes on the flop and you think they're more centered around some 6x, some 5x that you can now get them off of, obviously jamming makes a lot of sense. Like there's always, with this type of player you're up against, there's always randomness factors, right? Like in one direction, they may do something crazy like fold king 2 or something, right? Or they may do something the other direction, like they may call something crazy, like some naked 6x. But either way, it goes okay since, well, if you get a king to fold magically, that's great. If some 6x calls you, well, you're going to have a bunch of equity with your flush draws, straight draw, plus maybe your 8 and your 7 have live cards. So you're going to have a bunch of equity. So I do like the jam versus this player type, yes.
Nice. Well, it did work out. The fish got out of the way. We win the pot with 8 high, and we can move on to the next one. Hey, real quick, if you're getting value from this video, do us a quick favor. Click that like button, subscribe, rate the podcast 5 stars. Any positive signals you can send to our algorithmic overlords, we'd really appreciate it. It allows us to justify continuing to make valuable content like this to help your poker game. Thanks. Moving on, I believe this is the same tournament. The blinds are now 600, 1200. Our hero races from middle position with ace-jack offsuit to 2,500 off of a 35K chip stack, the small blind and the big blind call. Anything to say here on the pre-flop play, Tim? Seems pretty standard.
Very standard. Again, MP, I assume that means hijack. But again, these things matter. So I would always, for ease, I always call under the gun 8-handed, under the gun 8, 7-handed, well, under the gun 7, low jack, hijack, cutoff, button. That's how I personally think of it. And the positions are just so important to get right. So I assume our hero in this hand means MP is hijack.
Yeah, something like that. It could be low jack as well. I kind of hear it used interchangeably.
Right.
Chat GPT agrees, just said pre-flop is a standard open, so it finally got something right there. We did forget to grade it on the last one. Let's just give it, a C-. We can move on though. Yeah. Flop, king, jack 4, rainbow. Both the small blind and the big blind check, and Stu goes for a 2,000 chip continuation bet. Very small bet, something like 10K in the pot, so he's going about 20%, and only the small blind calls. Here's what the bot had to say. Into 2 players, this 2K c-bet is good. The small sizing fits your range advantage and protects your checking range. Not sure how a bet can protect a checking range. When the small blind calls, his range is heavily king X, jack X, stubborn pocket pairs, and occasional floats. So kind of 2 things to jump onto there, Tim. First of all, what do you think about Stu's play going for this small c-bet with this pretty solidly medium strength to maybe slightly strong hand, middle pair top kicker? And do you agree with sort of ChatGPT's ranging here? King X, jack X, stubborn pocket pairs, occasional floats.
Yeah, I mean, these 3-way spots can be tricky. This type of board, well, it should hit the small blind quite hard since they're probably pretty heavy with offsuit Broadway flats. So I don't think this is like a pure bet board for the IP player, like it would be, say, in a single raise pot if you raise first in and the big blind called. So you clearly have a middling hand with ace jack. To be honest, this hand can go either way, check or bet at some frequency, with a little bit of a preference to check. But I do like the flop size. You don't need to bet overly big just to target a bunch of pocket pairs. It is quite a good board for you anyways. So like I said, you can really go either way, and that's going to be the case in a lot of spots.
Yeah, that's poker for you, especially when you have these kind of hands that clearly this hand, middle pair top kicker, is worth 20% of the pot at this point, but it's also kind of middling, so it kind of wants to check. So it just makes sense. Betting small and checking are very similar actions, so it makes sense that it can kind of go either way, a hand like this. We get the 9 of diamonds on the turn. We're heads up here, so it's king, jack 4, 9. Queen 10 is kind of the obvious thing that changes on the turn and gets there for the nut straight. And the action goes check, check. ChatGPT likes the check, says you're not getting 3 streets from worse often, and you keep his weaker jack X and bluffs alive. Do you like this check on the turn? Would you maybe try to eke out a bet here to check the river? How are you approaching it?
Yeah, I mean, I think this hand predominantly checks. I wouldn't be surprised, like, again, coming from like a solver background, where there may be some mergey bets here where you can possibly target some like king 7 suited and get a hand like queen jack, jack 10 to call you again. So betting does have some upside, but yeah, I would predominantly check this.
Stu got that one right, and we go to the river, which completes the board with a 5. So the board is finally king, jack 4, 9, 5. No flush draws at any point. And the small blind bets out for 4,000. Fairly small bet. It's like 4,000 into something like 12,000. So we're getting a really, really good price. Stu decides to pay it off. ChatGPT says this is quote unquote a key spot. I got to say, I disagree. Facing 25% bets on the river is not going to make or break your poker career. And it says population massively under bluffs, says the word river donks, it's using a term wrong, especially in this line, quote unquote. Honestly, I think this is probably a fold exploitatively. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. ChatGPT has some okay points. Like again, coming from an equilibrium background, like you would have to call ace jack because, like you said, it is only a small bet. It's not impossible that you can chop versus ace jack yourself, or you could potentially like beat queen jack. Like not
Right.
that much money has gone into the pot. So yeah, facing what is it, like a third pot? Yeah, I think ace jack is just a clear call. I get it. Exploitatively, I see some medium, like mid stakes players or lower stakes players kind of go down this slippery slope here where when they're up against like a milky size that they don't want to pay it. And I get it because it feels like the general player pool is kind of only using that size as a milky value bet. But in theory, like they're supposed to have it, right? Like with the small size, like if they had 50 value combos, they only need like roughly 10 bluffs or something to create this. So you're supposed to call and lose a bunch. So yeah, you just kind of create this bias where you may think, oh, I always call and they have it, but they're kind of just supposed to have it. That's the way like a value to bluff ratio works. And it can be, again, like a slippery slope if you're going to go down this explo route of trying to like own people by overfolding, because there is always a randomness factor that your opponent may be up to. Like you don't always know. So oftentimes when I'm in the spot and I feel like I'm getting milked or whatever, and I call and I win, I try to remind myself like not to have that bias because there is a randomness factor. There is this confirmation bias thing where you call and lose so often that you're like, oh, I should have got away from it. It's so obvious. But oftentimes you just call and you win and you win. So I would always play, especially for these small bets. I don't like doing anything fancy. I kind of just pay. You don't have to be right all that often. And like I said, it's not impossible that you beat value. So yes, I think our hero played the hand very, very well, and I give him a high grade.
Yeah, agreed. I think the way you like quote unquote exploit someone who you think is maybe too value heavy here, and again to your point, they're supposed to be mostly value heavy here. Their bluff to value ratio is got to be what, 75 or 80 to 20, something like that, like 80-20%. That is 80% in favor of value. So you're supposed to lose a lot, but that's okay. It can still be a profitable call. That is tricky to kind of cement in your understanding as a human. You know, you want to win more often than you lose. That's just not the mechanics of this spot. But I think the way you exploit this player then is you fold like 10-9, because that's a hand that probably pays the 4K as well in like solver land, let's say. But if you think the guy's just got a jack or a king too often, then you fold the 10-9. You fold your turn third pair and don't lose too much sleep. But I think if you're folding ace jack, I mean, yeah, you beat some value. You beat queen jack, you beat jack 10, a 9. Like I think, you know, something like 10-9 or queen 9 could definitely be in there for this player. And yeah, you'll occasionally see a guy show up with like pocket twos or something weird.
Exactly.
Especially when you're playing live. So you don't need that stuff to happen that often to make this call profitable.
Right. And like with the 10-9, you can definitely get aggressive as well with, you know, especially if you think it's going to overperform by just putting in a river raise, like jamming the river, you know, goes quite well with that kind of combo, especially if you have the right suits where you block some king 9, jack 9 suited. Those are the type of things I'm thinking about. And especially I'm trying to target that player type who I think is being milky and then really, really values their tournament life and doesn't want a hero call. So yeah, those are the type of things I'm thinking about.
Yeah, so overall, ChatGPT mostly a little too monsters under the bed, I would say on this one. I would go for maybe another D+ for this one.
Right, I would agree, and they kind of have the like the population tendency thing. Like they have the idea, but they missed the point a little bit, I think. And but not the worst breakdown from ChatGPT. I will give credit.
All right, moving on. 500, 1,000 blinds in this next hand. Really short one here. It's just a pre-flop spot. The small blind, who's an active, non-studied player. That's our hero's read. He limps in from the small blind and says, "You can raise if you want," as Stu is thinking. Stu snap raises after hearing that with pocket fours to 25K. They're 28 effective, so he's basically jamming for 28 blinds. And the small blind quickly folds. I'm just going to read all of ChatGPT's analysis here for the most part, and then we'll go from there. This is hilarious and honestly probably good. You had 28 BB effective. He verbally invited aggression. That usually means fake strength, discomfort, or recreational needling. Interesting one there. The key point, most non-studied live players limp fold way too much, blind versus blind. I think that's undoubtedly true. So your shove leverages maximum fold equity, huge pressure on weak capped ranges, and his likely inability to call off correctly. Here's my favorite part of ChatGPT's analysis. Would the solver jam pocket fours for 28 big blinds over a limp? Almost certainly not. Would I hate this exploit against a weak recreational player telegraphing uncertainty? Not at all. This is a very live poker hand. The snap matters. Snap shoving projects confidence and removes information leakage. Tank jamming there is much worse. So before I kick it over to you, Tim, here's kind of my thoughts on this one and why Stu sent me like 20 of these hands. This is a short one, but it really jumped out at me because I thought it was interesting that ChatGPT got arguably the more obvious thing, but maybe the more important thing about being a poker player correct. It got the like really obvious population read, right? Which the guy said, you can raise if you want. He limped. He's a live player. If we use our, logical reasoning here, I would bet 99% of the time he's not playing a game. He didn't limp with aces. And this is like he's playing 4D chess to try to get us to jam. He actually limped because he has like 10-6 suited. And then he's looking at us and he's not feeling great. And he's like, you can raise if you want. He's telling the truth when he says that. And ChatGPT correctly gets that like population read right. I gather you would largely agree with that bit.
I agree with that, yeah.
But then we move on to the part where it just totally takes a blindfolded shot in the dark about what a solver would do here with fours. So it says, would a solver jam pocket fours 28 blinds over a limp? Almost certainly not. I just absolutely love that it pure guesses there. And Tim, you can give the answer. Would a solver ever jam fours for, let's say, 28 or maybe 30 big blinds over a limp?
Yeah, I mean, the small pocket pairs do rip over the limp. It's like deuces through fives and some offsuit ace-x builds the range. But yeah, it is actually the higher EV play is to rip. So the chatbot is just talking out of their ass a little bit. The chatbot is like a bit of this friend where they might know a lot of stuff, but they're just way overconfident, it sounds like.
Right, exactly. And that, again, this video is kind of a cautionary tale on using these LLMs for like important stuff, right? Like we're looking at this spot. We have a screenshot if you're watching the video version of how a solver plays the spot for chip EV sim. And it's a 30 big blind sim, pocket fours, pocket threes, pocket twos, 100% jam over the limp. It's just not close. The EV is just higher, not close. Pocket fives get in there like half the time too, to Tim's point about those. But ChatGPT is just, again, it's generating text, it's guessing, and giving pretty poor advice about that. Like this is a clear hand to jam. You want to take down this pot pre-flop. Your hand doesn't play super well in the like single raise pot line or the limp line because it's often going to be an underpair. You just perform much better just winning the pot pre-flop the vast majority of the time.
I'm with you 100%, and also with your analysis of ChatGPT. ChatGPT is kind of like a field player, not really a solver player, it seems like.
Yeah, maybe we should get him in there, see how it performs.
Yeah.
Moving on to our fifth and final hand, the blinds are 600, 1200, and the under the gun +1 player raises to 2,800. The button calls and the small blind, our hero, calls with king 10 of diamonds, and the big blind gets out of the way. ChatGPT says about the preflop play, with small blind versus under the gun open and button call, with 27 big blinds, calling is fine. Your hand might be dominated, but a suited Broadway with that price is playable. What do you think about this one, Tim?
Yeah, I think this combo always wants to jam pre. I mean, we talk about it quite a lot in the course, but these suited Broadways, they're really aggressive to squeeze jam all in. Exactly what the bot was just saying. Whereas it is often dominated pre by, say, ace and off, king, queen off. And by ripping, we can get those hands to fold. So we're folding out dominating hands. We get to realize all of our equity when we do jam. And being in the small blind here, multi-way, we're going to obviously have quite bad, well, we're going to just negate our positional disadvantage by just ripping and just potentially winning the pot pre-flop. And if we do get called, we'll have okay equity. There's 8K in the pot, so it's like a significant part of our stack if we just win in a pre. So yeah, I am not a fan of the overcall. I would like to just rip this pre.
Cool. Yeah, I find myself making this play a lot more when it's like hijack or cutoff opens, button calls, and then my like eyes light up because they have so many of those offsuit hands that dominate me that I'm really targeting and getting them to fold pre-flop. Under the gun one, I'm surprised to hear you say you still like the rip, and it's good to know for my own game because that's a range that I would be a little bit more concerned about, but maybe I'm a little bit too much monsters under the bed.
Yeah, I mean, again, we don't know if this is under the gun 8 or 9 or low jack, but I'm pretty sure on this depth, this is the type of hand class that would always rip. Again, getting dominating combos to fold. Like even if this U8, they're still opening king jack off, king queen off, ace 10 off, all hands that are folding versus your jam. They're folding, and then the suited versions, king jack suited is folding, king queen suited. So yeah, there's just a huge benefits of ripping this hand class. And the button is calling too, right? So the button is going to be relatively wide. They're going to have a bunch of the pairs. They're going to have still a bunch of offsuit hands that again dominate you. So you're just targeting two ranges, and it's not like you have some shitty hand. You have a hand that wants to realize all its equity, and when you go post, you're supposed to not realize equity really well as the person in the worst position. So I really, really want a jam here for our hero.
Yeah, and I don't want to spend too much more time on preflop, but one more kind of, I mean, a theme in this video has been giving all of the details needed to, analyze a hand properly. And I think one thing that would matter quite a bit here is how deep under the gun one and button were, right? Because you'll see in position versus a raise in tournaments, some surprisingly strong hands get in there for just calls when you're like 50 blinds deep. I see this a lot. Like I'm really surprised by how often like tens, jacks, and even queens will just call a raise at 50 big blinds. And I think it's trying to do two things. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but A, it feels like it doesn't want to get stacked by like a better hand every single time. And by three betting, you just basically guarantee you're going to get stacked if they have a better hand. You also allow stuff behind to happen if you just call. So the guy calls on the button here with two jacks. We jam from the small blind with king 10 suited. The under the gun gets out of the way, and now he gets like a fist pump call with jacks. So it's just like some really nice things happen. And it also just plays really well in a single raise pot in position, right? Like it's a really nice hand to have. It's going to make, a lot of strong overpairs. How much would that really play a role here? Like if under the gun +1 was 60 blinds deep, button was 60 blinds deep. Yeah. Are you more or less likely to make that kind of power jam with king 10 suited?
Yeah, it's a loaded question. I mean, so if it was like the U7 player versus the low jack, you're going to mostly want to have a pretty aggressive three betting strategy just because there are like a lot of hands behind you. As the button, you're just going to be a little more polar. Like you're kind of alluding to anyways, getting in 60 blinds like U7 versus button with jacks or queens, it can be a little dicey. You can kind of go either way, especially with jacks. So yes, you're making a great point that the effective stacks of the other two players is really, really important. But still, when we think of a range and how it's built and how many combos are in there, yes, if you rip king 10 suited here and you get called by queens or jacks, that sucks. But proportionally, it doesn't just make up a ton of the range. They will still have, deuces and ace 4 suited, and just getting anything to fold is great. Yeah. So yeah, in proportions, I still think, like, I understand where you're coming from. That is a part of it, but the upside of ripping and getting all those other hands to fold is going to be worth it. So even if it was like a 60 BB open, 60 BB call, and you're on 30 in the small blind, I still think it's a rip with this particular hand. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yeah. Those 8 combos of jacks and queens not deterring you, which
right.
makes sense.
And those, exactly. They're mixing too, right? Like you said, they're 8 combos, not a full 12. So those are things to think about.
Right. Makes sense. All right. Well, with all of that said on the flop, or pre-flop rather, let's move on to the flop and get the 10-9-4 with 2 clubs. So we flop top pair, checks to the button. So that's the player who called pre-flop, who goes 3,500. That's something like a third pot. Stu decides to just call here, and the under the gun player gets out of the way. Chat GPT says the check call is good. You have a top pair and decent kicker, multi-way, under the gun still uncapped, so no need to blast. I don't know if it's so trivial. Do you ever consider a check raise here?
Yeah, quite a lot. There's just so much in the pot now. You don't have that much back. yes, it can suck getting it in versus a better hand, but a lot of the times, like you just get it in and both players fold, just like denying equity. Sometimes you get it in versus a worse 10. So yeah, I think calling is okay, but I'm leaning to raise pretty frequently. It is a really dynamic board. You are in a positional disadvantage so much in the pot. Yeah, I think I lean raise, but I think it's close in EV.
So Stu does just call, and we get the 6 of clubs on the turn. That makes the board 10, 9, 4, 6, now with 3 clubs. And the action goes check, check. Pretty clear check here. I don't think we want to do any leading, and ChatGPT said the same thing. And when the button checks back, he often has medium, one pair, showdown value hand, like 10, 9, 10x, 9x, or maybe some hands with one club that didn't want to get blown off their equity. I assume, do you agree with the ranging? I mean, obviously we're going to check to the better in this situation. I assume there's not really much of a reason to lead, or maybe you disagree.
I think there could actually be some sneaky leads on the flush completing turn. 8-7 gets there. Again, like the way this hand works is the button, they're going to be pretty stab happy with a lot of their range. Pocket pairs just betting for kind of this, well, bit of protection, just a lot of small betting as the IP player. And when we call, all of a sudden our range is relatively strong, maybe some 10x, some strong draws, or some decently strong draws. And I think we leverage the situation by often playing a small block on the turn. I could be wrong about this. I can't say that I'm an expert in this particular three-way pot where it's like EP opens, button calls, and small blind calls. But I would not be shocked if you built us in for this and there would be some small blocking on the turn on the 6 of spades from the small blind. So I think that is an option for you.
Yeah, makes sense. 6 of clubs, by the way, did complete that flush.
Sorry. Yeah, I always think in spades for some reason when I think of flush.
Of course. Yeah. Spade dominance. Classic.
Yeah.
All right. So we do go check, check, and the river is the jack of hearts. So the final board, 10, 9, 4, 6, jack with 3 clubs. Stu goes for a very small bet. He goes like 1,600 into about 18K. So about a 10% block bet. Mm-hmm. And he ends up getting raised. He gets raised to 10,000, which is something like a half pot raise. So not a huge raise by any means. The ChatGPT says a lot here. And if you're watching the video version, you can read all of it. But the gist of what it says is very results oriented, frankly. You know, you go 1,600, it's so small, it can induce exactly what happened. It looks like what your hand is, a good hand that doesn't want to face a real bet. Against many players, tiny block bets work. Against anyone with aggression, it gives them a cheap, obvious attack point. Kind of taking a step back, what do you think about blocking this particular hand? Do you think we're targeting enough worse hands to block with this hand?
Yeah, I mean, the jack is a bit dicey. I think it's fine. It's kind of like exactly what your hand is worth. Really, between checking and playing B10, both seem fine. Exploitatively, it's kind of a little bit what ChatGPT is saying, that if you are up against a certain player type who's a little more passive and likes calling, then this is especially good, versus someone with tricks and aggression. This gets a little more worrisome, especially if you're not prepared to make some difficult decisions like calling or back raising. So I think ChatGPT has at least an okay idea, but in theory, checking or playing B10 seems completely fine, and I would have a preference versus certain player types.
The results, the button did take this one down. Stu got out of the way, and the button showed the 2 of clubs, 2 of spades. So he had that somewhat relevant 2 of clubs blocker blocking some of the flushes, and our hero gave him a nice fist bump for that one, well-deserved for showing the heart. And you know, ChatGPT loved it too, quote unquote, the fist bump was classy. Thanks, bot.
Like ChatGPT is like I don't even know. What would you describe ChatGPT as? Like a 2-5 grinder who just has played for 40 years or 30 years. It seems like that, right? And has never looked at a preflop chart. That's what it feels like.
Yeah, maybe 2-5 is even a little bit of a stretch. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Give him 1-3.
Okay, 1-3.
All right, thanks a ton for joining us, Tim. Hopefully you enjoyed that really high-level analysis mixed in with the extremely low-level bot analysis. Make sure to pre-register for Modern Tournament Mastery coming this Monday on upswingpoker.com. If you get that course next week, during launch week, you also get Tim's bonus course, Super High Roller Mechanics, as a free bonus that's going to cost $300 on the weeks that follow. So make sure you jump on that course early. If you want to see more from Tim, check out this video he put out a couple of weeks ago. And with all that said, thanks again for watching.